Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabul Jinaya. We are on the book of Al-Jinaya. Al-Jinaya in the fiqhi sense means to transgress against somebody else's body in such a way so as to necessitate blood money or retaliation. Jinaya, and from that is murder, is an absolute major sin which too many people do not take seriously enough. But in the eyes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, it is immensely serious. And the first matter which will be judged between the people on Yawm al-Qiyamah will be about the blood. Authentically in the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ said, لَوْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ اشْتَرَكُوا فِي دَمِ مُؤْمِنٍ لَأَكَبَّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي النَّارِ. If the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth, all of them together, participated in shedding the blood of a mu'min, Allah will throw them face down into the fire. Even killing yourself is a major sin which would warrant Jahannam. So how about killing somebody else? The Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih taught us that whoever jumps off a mountain killing himself, he will be repeating this act in Jahannam forever on. And whoever sips poison and kills himself this way, he will be sipping poison on and on in Jahannam. And whoever stabs himself with a knife, then in Jahannam he will have this knife in his hand, stabbing his belly on and on. Let us first talk about killing. So killing is of three types. First one is intentional killing, which is what we would call murder. This is where a mukallaf attacks an innocent person, in other words one who is ma'soom, in a way which normally leads to death. In such a case, the awliya, or the relatives, meaning the inheritors of the deceased, can retaliate in a life-for-a-life situation, as given in the Quran. Or they can take the blood money, or they can just outright forgive the assailant. The madhab also says that they can ask for more than the blood money, which would be a sulh, which we spoke about previously. The authentic narration in the Sunan says that for intentional murder, there is 100 camels to be given, 30 hiqqa, which means a camel who has completed 3 years of life, 30 jadha'a, and that is a camel having completed 4 years of life, and 40 pregnant camels. So that makes 100 in total. Then he goes on to say, وَمَا صُولِحُوا عَلَيْهِ فَهُوَ لَهُمْ وَذَلِكَ لِتَشْدِيدِ الْعَقْلِ. And whatever they agree to, then that is for them, and this is in order to make the blood money severe. In the grand scheme of things, the best option is to forgive, and this is better for your reward. And it has been reported authentically that never did a situation of qisas come to the Prophet except he would advise the owner of the right to forgive the assailant. And authentically the Prophet said, مَا زَادَ اللَّهُ عَبْدًا بِعَفْوٍ إِلَّا عِزَّةً. Allah Jalla wa Ala only increases a person who forgives in honor. And what we are talking about is honor in this life and in the hereafter. Then secondly, we have what is called shibhul amd, or that which resembles intentional murder. And this is where the assailant attacks an innocent person with that which does not normally lead to death. Now, the situation here is that qisas cannot be taken because it is not amd, it is not intentional. There is an element of accident here. But the blood money can be the same as intentional killing. And of course you have the option to forgive as well. And the Prophet said that the shibhul amd, what is done with a whip or a stick, is 100 camels, and from them 40 pregnant ones. Because normally hitting somebody with a whip or a stick does not cause death. You normally intend to give them pain. As for this matter of what normally causes death, then this is subject to investigation and will be a matter of judgment. And then thirdly we have al-khata, accidental. And this is where a mukallaf does something which is permissible for him to do, and yet it results in the death of an innocent person. For example, he is hunting a game animal, and an innocent human being comes in the way as he shoots. Now here you can forgive, or you can take blood money. But the blood money will not be severe blood money. It will still be 100 camels, but the types of camel is what makes it severe or less severe. So the severe type of blood money would be 100 camels, 40 of whom are pregnant. Whereas with the khata, the blood money does not need to include pregnant camels. Of course, pregnant camels are more valuable than non-pregnant ones. We have some narrations which give us some numbers, one which we have already provided just a moment back, but there are other narrations. So one narration in the Sunan says, for the Amd and Shibhul Amd, it goes up in 25s. So 25 bint Makhad, that's a dromedary of 1 year. 25 bint Laboon, that is a dromedary of 2 years. 25 Hiqqa, that's a dromedary of 3 years. And 25 Jada'ah, a dromedary which has completed 4 years of her life. As for the Diyatul Khata, that's also been given in a narration, and this goes in 20s. 20 Banu Makhad, that's a male camel of 1 year, and then 20 Bint Makhad, 20 Bint Laboon, 20 Hiqqa, and 20 Jada'ah. So you see, with the Khata, it includes 20 male camels, whereas with the Diyatul Amd wa Shibhul Amd, it does not include any male camels. And the reason is because the male camel is worth less than the female camel, because females can give birth, so the number of camels you have can be multiplied. Of course, nowadays most people do not deal with camels, and you'll find certain Muslim countries have a currency equivalent of the diya, and that is of course fine. Now the second rule to note is one of al-kaffara, expiation of the sin. When it comes to the shibhul amd and khata, you have to offer the kaffara if you are the killer. And also the diya, the blood money, will be upon the aqila of the killer, so it will not be upon the killer per se. The aqila are the adult asaba of the assailant, both the near and the far, and they pay the diya on behalf of the assailant if the diya, the blood money, reaches a third of the full blood money or more. And this is the madhab on the matter. If the assailant killed a servant, then again they do not pay, because when the assailant kills a servant, then this is not counted as killing a human, rather it is counted as destroying property. And so the blood money of the servant would actually be his value. Likewise, if the assailant confesses to the killing, but his aqila do not believe him, then they do not need to pay. Likewise, if he makes a sulh to pay the blood money, then the aqila again do not need to pay, because the killing was not established via evidence of witnesses. Okay, now let us talk about qisas, of a life for life. Qisas is simply a retaliation for a bodily harm, be it a life or limb, or injury. But they do not include wealth in this, even though the Quran does say that the reward of an evil is an evil like thereof. Anyway, there are 5 conditions which would make the qisas eligible. Number 1, that it should be intentional murder, amd. So it cannot be khata or shibhul amd. Number 2, the killer must be mukallaf, that is to say baligh and aqil. So you do not take retaliation on a child, because they are not accountable for their deeds. Number 3, the one who is killed should be ma'soom, meaning his blood is protected. So if, for example, the one killed is an adulterer who should have been stoned to death, but somebody else killed him, then his blood is not protected. Therefore the qisas would not be valid. Likewise a harbi or a murtad. In all of these cases, there is no kafara and no blood money either. Having said that, the killer is still to be punished for taking the law into his own hands. Number 4, that the killer should be on equal status to the victim or higher in terms of deen and freedom. And so we say that the Muslim is not killed for a kafir, but the kafir is killed for a Muslim, and we have evidence for that. The madhab also says in terms of freedom, so in other words, the servant is killed if he kills a free person, but a free is not killed for killing a servant. However, outside of the madhab, it could be argued justifiably that the free is to be killed for the servant, even though they're not the same when it comes to blood money, but they are the same when it comes to a life for a life, because the blood of the Muslimin is equal, as the Prophet ﷺ told us. And fifthly, that the victim should not be the child of the killer. So in other words, a man cannot be retaliated against for killing his own son or daughter. and the same rule can be given to the grandfather and so on. And this is taken authentically from the Sunan, لا يقتل والد بولده. The father is not killed for his child, but the diya, or the blood money, can be extracted from him. However, the other way around, if a son or daughter kills his or her parent, then they can be retaliated against. Okay, so those were the 5 conditions for the qisas to be eligible. Now we need to discuss the 3 conditions for it to be permissible to actually take the qisas, meaning implement it. And these are as follows. Condition number 1, that the one who has the right to take the qisas should be a mukallaf. So in other words, he's not allowed to be below the age of puberty, he's not allowed to be insane, because such a decision, which is a major decision, needs to be taken by an adult of sound mind. Condition number 2, all the people who are entitled to take the qisas, so that would be the awliya of the deceased, must agree to it. If even one of the awliya disagrees and does not want to take the qisas, he would rather either forgive or take the blood money, then the qisas cannot be taken. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَمَنْ عُفِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ شَيْءٌ فَاتِّبَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَدَاءٌ إِلَيْهِ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Whoever is forgiven in anything from his brother, so that is to say, to go from a qisas to blood money, then the blood money should be demanded with goodness and paid with goodness. So no being lazy and slacking off and so on. And also that if you are demanding blood money, you're not allowed to exact any physical revenge on the assailant. So if anything is forgiven, then we have to resort to the blood money, which means even if one person forgives, then the qisas cannot be taken. So we find then so far that not only must the awliya be mukallaf, but that they must also agree to it. So these are the first 2 conditions. And the last condition is that you need to be safe from transgressing the bounds when taking the qisas. For example, if the assailant is a pregnant woman, you cannot execute the woman, because then you'll be executing a child as well. So you have to wait for her to deliver the baby, and then you can exact revenge. So these are the 3 conditions of the administration of the qisas to be valid. And the previous 5 conditions were for the applicability of the qisas. So note the difference between the applicability and the administration. Now let us talk about the conditions of qisas for other than a life for a life situation. So we're talking about a limb for a limb. For example, if somebody chops your arm off, you have the right to chop their arm off. And again, we are talking about the conditions, and 5 of them here, of the applicability of the qisas. So condition number 1, that it should be on purpose. So if somebody chops your hand off by accident, you do not have the right to take qisas. So it has to be amd, or intentional. Condition number 2, that the one taking the qisas should be equal to the assailant in terms of the freedom and in terms of the deen, just as what we said with a life for a life situation. Again, you could argue back with regards to a servant taking qisas on a free person, but the madhab says that a servant is not allowed to take qisas on a free person. As for the deen, then there doesn't appear to be any arguments. And condition number 3, that the one taking the qisas should not be the progeny of the assailant. So that is to say, a son cannot take qisas on his father. And the reason for this is that they make the analogy with the life for life, based on the hadith, لا يقتل والد بولده. So now you will notice that these 3 conditions are the same as a life for life conditions of applicability. Now let us give 2 more conditions. The 4th one is that you are safe from transgressing the bounds. So if somebody has chopped your hand off from the wrist, then you can chop his hand off from the wrist, because that's a definite parting place, the wrist. But what if it is in the middle of the forearm somewhere, where it is harder to measure? In a case like this, qisas cannot be taken, when you are not safe that you will overstep the mark. However, with modern technology, it may be possible to get it just right. So even if the injury or the cutting off takes place in the middle of the bone somewhere, with modern technology it may be possible to even then take the qisas. But if ever there is some fear that you will not be able to take an equal for equal punishment, then you do not take qisas, because we are not allowed to overstep the mark. Do not forget we're talking about a limb here, so clearly the stakes are going to be higher. And the fifth condition is that the limb needs to be the same as the one which was transgressed against, in terms of the location and health. So we're talking about an eye for an eye, and a nose for a nose, and a tooth for a tooth, and so on. So you're not allowed to cut a hand for a foot, and so on. Also the location. If he cut your right hand off, you cut his right hand off. You're not allowed to cut his left hand for your right hand. No, it must be right for right or left for left. It cannot be right for left or left for right. And they must also be equal in terms of health. If he cut off your right hand, which was paralyzed, you are not allowed to cut off his right hand, which is not paralyzed or healthy. Likewise, if your assailant pops off your blind right eye, you are not allowed to pop off his seeing right eye. So the superior cannot be taken for the inferior. So those were the 5 conditions. The other vital point to know, that if after taking the qisas and assuming the qisas is done properly, then if after that the assailant suffers more injury, that is increased injury because of the qisas, then the one who took the qisas is not a guarantor, because the rule is ما ترتب على المأذون فليس بمضمون. Whatever results from an act which is permissible has legal indemnity, so that the person taking the qisas does not stand as a guarantor, as long as the qisas was taken properly, and that he was not guilty of gross negligence. So, for example, we want to take qisas on a particular person because he assaulted an individual. But we are told that we cannot take qisas on him right now because he is ill, and if qisas is taken on him, then this will affect his medical condition and it may lead to death. So instead of waiting, he takes qisas on that ill person, and because of the qisas, that ill person dies. Is he a guarantor? The answer is yes. In this case he is, because he is guilty of at-ta'addi, which is doing something he ought not to be doing. And whenever you're guilty of ta'addi or tafrit, then you stand as a guarantor. That's the general rule. Otherwise, you are not a guarantor, because you did that which was permissible. However, going the other way around, any injury which results from the jinaya, meaning from the actual crime itself, so this leads to an increased injury, then that does involve indemnity. For example, a criminal attacks an innocent person and cuts off his finger. Now the wound on his finger certainly heals, but renders the hand paralyzed. So now this is not the case of just the finger anymore. His whole hand is gone, despite the fact that the assailant did not actually attack the hand, it was just a finger. But we are allowed to hold him accountable for injuring the whole hand. So it will not just be a case of taking his finger, but also blood money being paid for rendering the hand useless. It is also worth pointing out that when qisas is taken, it needs to be in the presence of the ruler or his deputy, so as to make sure that liberties are not being taken. Okay, now let us talk about ad-diya, which means blood money. The blood money is money given because of injury or death. It is given to the victim or the awliya of the victim if the victim is dead. It is also called al-aql, which means to tie or to bind. And this would be because the blood money would be given in terms of camels, and the perpetrator would bring the camels and tie them in front of the house of the recipient. So aql means to tie or to bind. And of course the same word is used for the intellect. Aql is because the intellect ties you or binds you from doing that which is not in your best interest. The blood money is legislated by the Quran, the Sunnah and the Ijma' of the ulama. We find diya being mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, ayah 92. We find diya, blood money, being mentioned, for example, in the authentic narration in the Sunan, where he says that the blood money for an accidental killing is 30 bint makhad, 30 bint laboon, 30 hiqqa, and 10 banu laboon. and there are other narrations talking about different amounts as well. When is the blood money due? Well, it's due for all types of killing. Of course, intentional killing also has retaliation if they want to take that. If not, then blood money is applicable. If a child or an insane person kills somebody else, then even if they did it intentionally, quote unquote, their intentional is actually accidental because they do not have an intention. Therefore, they cannot do anything intentionally, officially speaking. Also, the blood money will be due if a free person kills a servant, according to that opinion of the Hanbali madhab. Likewise, if a Muslim kills a kafir, we know that there is no retaliation, but there is still blood money due. Similarly, if, for example, a person in his sleep manages to kill somebody, this is accidental killing, but blood money is still due. Even if it is accidental, the point is that if there is no blood money due, then a person's life will go wasted, and that cannot be. And likewise, if the parent kills his or her child, retaliation cannot be taken on the parent, but blood money can be taken. Now the diya can be divided into two types: diya mukhaffafa, a lightened blood money, and diya mughallada, a more harsh blood money. The basic principle is that the diya is measured in camels, and there are 100 camels for a life. Authentically in the Sunan, however, we find a narration where the price of camels rose too high, such that paying the diya would be incredibly difficult. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was the Khalifa at that time, gave a khutbah telling the people that the diya can be given as 1,000 dinar, gold coins, or 12,000 dirham, that's silver coins, or 200 cows, or 2,000 sheep. But the general principle is that it is based off 100 camels. This is the default. As for how these camels are divided up, then there are varying narrations. One narration you have just heard. Other narrations talk about 20 Banu Laboon, 20 Bint Makhad, 20 Bint Laboon, 20 Hiqqa, and 20 Jada'a. So that's 5 lots of 20s. As for the Mughallada, these are 100 camels and 40 of them are pregnant. That is what we find authentically in the Sunan. The Prophet ﷺ saying, أَلَا إِنَّ دِيَةَ الْخَطَأِ شِبْهِ الْعَمْدِ مَا كَانَ بِالصَّوْتِ وَالْعَصَى مِئَةٌ مِنَ الْإِبِلِ مِنْهَا أَرْبَعُونَ فِي بُطُونِهَا أَوْلَادُهَا. The blood money of Shibhul Amd, what happens from a whip or a stick, is 100 camels, 40 of which are pregnant. Also in the Sunan, authentically, the Prophet said, مَنْ قَتَلَ مُتَعَمِّدًا دُفِعَ إِلَى أَوْلِيَاءِ الْمَقْتُولِ. Whoever kills intentionally is to be brought to the awliya of the victim. فَإِنْ شَاءُوا قَتَلُوا وَإِنْ شَاءُوا أَخَذُوا الدِّيَةَ. If they will, they can retaliate, or if they want to, they can take the diya. وَهِيَ 30 حِقَّةً و30 جَذَعَةً و40 خَلِفَةً وَمَا صُولِحُوا عَلَيْهِ فَهُوَ لَهُمْ وَذَلِكَ لِتَشْدِيدِ الْعَقْلِ. And this diya which they take will be 30 hiqqa, 30 jadha'a, and 40 pregnant camels. And whatever reconciliation they make, it is for them, and this is in order to make the diya more severe. Now the madhab says that they can demand more than 100 if they want to, because they could just simply tell him, give us more than 100 camels, otherwise we just retaliate. However, the other opinion is, no, you're not allowed to ask for more than 100 camels. Sure, you can make these 100 camels more severe. So for example, a jadha'a is harder to give than a hiqqa, which is harder to give than a bint laboon, which is harder to give than a bint makhab, which is harder to give than a banu laboon. So you can rearrange that combination, but you cannot ask for more than 100 camels. And this is another opinion outside the madhab. But the point is that the severity comes into play with the type of camel that you give. Let us talk about the amounts given in the blood money. So let it be known that if someone kills another person intentionally, then the blood money is on him. If he kills the victim accidentally, or shibhul amd, which means resembling intentional, but it is not actually intentional, then the diya is on his aqila. And the aqila are the asaba in terms of the inheritance. Only aqila is slightly broader than the asaba, because, for example, if you have a father and you also have a brother, your brother is not going to inherit from you because of the father. So your brother is not an inheritor. Yet we say he is still from the asaba, and he is therefore also from the aqila. So if your father is poor, your brother will stand in as an aqila. So in other words, your brother will have to chip in to pay for the blood money, even though your brother is not actually an inheritor because he's being blocked off by your father. So the aqila are not the same as the inheritors. Rather, we can say the aqila are either inheritors or potential inheritors. And the wala is also included in the aqila. And the wala, if you've forgotten, is the relationship where if you are a servant and your master frees you, then he has your wala, that is to say, the right to inherit from you if you have no other inheritor. It should also be noted that the aqila have to be mukallaf, so a child and an insane person, even though these are rightful inheritors, are not from the aqila. Likewise, anyone who is poor is also not from the aqila simply because they cannot afford to pay the blood money, even though they may be your inheritors. No female can ever be an aqila because the females are not asaba in and of themselves. And this also discludes the female from the wala. She is not from the aqila. So no female can ever be from the aqila. Okay, here's a question. If a teacher hits his student, or a parent hits his child, or a husband hits his wife because of nushuz, and they do so giving a reasonable disciplinary hitting without overstepping the bounds, and this hitting results in an injury or death, then are these people guarantors? The answer is no. And the reason is because of the general rule that whatever results from that which is permissible is safe from indemnity. In other words, you do not stand as a guarantor. But if, for example, they hit harder than they ought to be hitting, or more than they ought to be hitting, for example, the Prophet gave us a limit of 10 strikes. And even then, you should not strike in a place which could cause injury or death, because some parts of the body are more fragile than other parts. The diya of a free Muslim, even if he's a child, regardless of age, as we have said, is 100 camels. And this is the blood money of a life. Now it is also valid to say, just as Umar radiallahu anh did, that the government can use their ijtihad and stipulate an amount using the currency of the land. And that is down to ijtihad. And this is for a male. As for a female, who is a Muslim and free, regardless of age, is the same as the male up till a third of the total blood money of 100 camels, but a third or more, then the female blood money is half of that of the male. Now, rationally speaking, one might question this. How is it that the blood money of a woman is the same as that of the man, which is fair enough, but when it reaches a third, it becomes a half? So the more severe the injury is, the less her blood money becomes. On the face of it, that does not make any sense. However, our job is not to listen to our rationality, but rather to give precedence to the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. Of course, our rationality is vital, no doubt about it. This is how we understand the Quran and the Sunnah. But if our thinking and rationale directly conflicts with the authentic Sunnah, then ours is to say we hear and we obey. And besides, we should rest safe in the knowledge that if it is authentically reported, then there must be a wisdom behind it. Whether we know it or not is immaterial. Okay, what about a Jew or a Christian? Their diya is half of that of the Muslim. Authentically, the Prophet said, "Aqlu ahli dhimma nisfu aqli al-muslimin." That the ahlu dhimma, their blood money, is half of the Muslimins. As for the Majusi, the madhab says that it is 800 dirham. And the better opinion is that the blood money of all the kuffar is half of that of the Muslimin. But the madhab says that apart from the Jew and the Christian, all the other kuffar, their diya is 800 dirham. And the diya of the females of the kuffar is half that of the males. So according to the madhab, that would be 400 dirham. Okay, what about the blood money of the servant? Well, the servant does not have blood money. Rather, he is treated when it comes to financial matters as a product. And so his blood money, quote unquote, would actually be his value, meaning to say his market price. As for any injury sustained, then the money to be given would be the difference in his market value before and after the injury. What about the blood money of a child in the belly? So he has not been born yet. This is 1/10 of the woman's blood money, so that would make it 1/10 of 50, which is 5 camels. As for if the pregnant mother is attacked, but the child is born alive and then thereafter dies, then this will be the complete blood money for a life. As for the servant, then the madhab says the same thing. It will be the 1/10 of the value of the servant woman. Another opinion out of the madhab says that we take the value of the servant woman when she's pregnant and the value of her when she is not pregnant, and the blood money would be the difference in value, because the servant is treated like a product, and so we have to start talking about their market value. Okay, so that was dealing with life. Now let us deal with limb and also faculties, such as the faculty of sight, of hearing, of taste, and so on. Anyone who completely damages somebody else's faculty has to pay the full blood money for life, which is 100 camels, as we have said before. So if somebody attacks the victim and turns him insane, so he loses the faculty of reason, or for example, he loses the faculty of smell, or vision, so he destroys both his eyes, or speech, so for example, he cuts off his tongue, or for example, he cuts off his reproductive organs so that he is unable to have intercourse, or maybe he paralyzes him so he's unable to stand up or sit down. All of this incurs the full blood money. As for the limbs, then if you break or destroy something which you only have one of, then this incurs the full blood money. Let's say the nose. You only have one nose, but if you chop off all of the nose, then you will have to give the full blood money. What about those limbs which you have 2 of? 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 lips, 2 eyebrows, 2 breasts for a woman, 2 buttocks, 2 legs, 2 ears. So what happens here is that each of these is worth half of the total blood money. Authentically, the Prophet taught us that for the hand, for the foot, and for the eye, there are 50 camels. As for the fingers, both of the hands and the feet, then these are 10 camels each. So 10 times 10 makes 100. And we have authentic narrations in the Sunan for this ruling. Authentically, in the Sunan, during the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, one man threw a stone at another and destroyed his sense of hearing, his speech, his reasoning faculty, and his reproductive organ. And Umar radiallahu anh judged that he has to pay 4 full blood monies. And this is because he destroyed 4 faculties. So in camel terms, that would be 400 camels. And for every 100, 40 need to be pregnant ones. Now previously we said that the diya for one eye is 50 camels. However, what if you destroy the eye of a one-eyed person? Then essentially you've taken his faculty of vision away. And so that would incur a full blood money. And this is what Umar ibn al-Khattab judged. And of course it makes rational sense as well. Okay, now let us talk about injury. When it comes to sustaining an injury, like a wound, then what the ulama say is that there is no fixed blood money for most injuries, except that there is what they call a hakuma. Now what this means is that you evaluate how much money should be given to you. And the way to do that is that you pretend that this person is a servant and you ask how much is he worth before the injury. Let's say he's worth 100 dinar. Then you ask yourself, okay, after the injury has been sustained and then healed from, now how much is he worth? Let us say he's now worth 95 dinar. So that makes a reduction of 5, meaning 5 out of 100. So as a fraction that will be a 20th. So that means this would incur a 20th of the total blood money. The total blood money for a life course being 100 camels, so a 20th means 5 camels. And so this is the hakuma. You evaluate the fraction by asking yourself the value before and after the injury. Now, there are 5 types of injury on the head for which there is a stipulated amount. And injuries on the head are more dangerous, so they're going to incur a higher blood money than injuries on other parts of the body. Now, scholars speak about different types of injuries like this. So, for example, you have what is called al-harisa, which is simply a scratch and does not cause a bleeding. Then you have ad-damiya, which means that which bleeds. It is also called al-bazila. Thirdly, you have al-badi'ah, and this is an injury which reaches the flesh but does not penetrate the flesh. And then you have al-mutalahima, and this is an injury which does not just reach the flesh, which is al-badi'ah, but rather it penetrates into the flesh. And then fifthly, you have as-simhaq. Now, as-simhaq is a thin layer on the bone. So this injury pierces through the flesh and reaches that thin layer on the bone. So with these types of injuries of varying penetration, there is nothing stipulated. You just have to use a judgment, and as we said, the hakuma is needed here. Now these 5 which we have mentioned are injuries on the face or head for which there is no stipulated blood money. Now we also have another 5 types of injury on the face or head for which there is a stipulated blood money. Let's talk about these. The first one is al-mudiha, and this is an injury which reaches the bone and exposes the bone. So actually it's a step beyond as-simhaq. And here 5 camels are to be given. And the evidence of this is authentically found in the Sunan. He said, alayhi salatu wasalam, وَفِي الْمَوَاضِحِ خَمْسٌ. Then after that, we have the al-hashima, which means to crush the bone. And this incurs 10 camels. After that, we have the al-munaqqila, and this means dislocation. So it's an injury which dislocates the bone, moves it from its proper position. So here now you're going to have to physically move the bone back to its original position, and it will not heal by itself. With this type of injury, you need to give 15 camels. And then fourthly, you have the al-ma'muma. This is an injury which reaches the surface or the outer layer of the brain, so that you can see the surface of the brain or the outer skin of the brain. And with this you have 1/3 of the blood money to be paid. And then you have the al-ja'ifa. Now the ja'ifa means that which reaches the inner part of the body. It does not have to be now restricted to the head, which is what the previous 4 were restricted to. So for example, if somebody stabs another person in the belly or in the back or in the chest, and the knife reaches the inner part of the body. So again here, there is 1/3 of the full blood money to be paid. So that means if the full blood money is 100 camels for the man, it would be 33 camels and 1/3 of the blood money. That will have to be paid in terms of the money or currency, because of course you cannot pay 1/3 of a camel. Okay, now let's go a step further. What about what they call an-nafidha, which means to go through? So this would be, let's say a person stabs another with a sword, and it goes through the belly and out through the back, goes right through the body. The Hanbali madhab here is that this incurs 2/3 of the blood money. Now why would they say that? Because this is a ja'ifa from both ends, if you picture it. And so they use their ijtihad and say that this will incur 2/3 of the full blood money. That is to say, 66 2/3 of a camel. So 66 camels and then 2/3 of the full blood money paid in currency. Okay, now let us talk about the aqila. And we have said before who they are. They are the mukallaf asaba of the assailant, regardless of whether they're going to inherit from the assailant or not. So your spouse is not from the aqila, and neither are those relatives related to you through just a single female, like your uterine siblings. So what is so special about the aqila then? Well, if you have any problems within the tribe, then typically your aqila would be your support. And the word asaba comes from asb, and you make an asb with your imama, for example. You tie it around your head, and so the asaba tie around you and strengthen you. They are your backbone, if you like. They are your support. And so these are the people who will pay the blood money which is upon you in a case of accidental or quasi-intentional killing. That is to say, the shibhul amd. They do not pay for you in a deliberate killing, meaning a murder. That's all on you. And because we're speaking of paying money, then anyone who is poor from your aqila does not need to pay, obviously, because he's poor. And in the Sahihain, with the hadith about two women from Hudayl fighting, and one of them threw a stone at the other and killed the unborn child of the pregnant woman, the Prophet ordered that the blood money of the unborn child is to be paid by the aqila. So the aqila share in paying the blood money. So the one who is to inherit more will pay more, and so on, in that type of ratio. There are 5 conditions for the aqila to pay the blood money. Number 1, the aqila is a free person because a servant does not have any money for himself. He is himself owned. Secondly, that he is mukallaf. So a child does not need to pay even if he is an inheritor. And an insane person does not need to pay, as he is not from the aqila. An insane person cannot provide any help during a time of a fight. Thirdly, that they must be male. As stated before, of course, no woman can be part of the aqila, even if she is an inheritor. Fourthly, that they are rich enough to pay. If they are poor, they do not need to take out a loan. And condition 5, they must be Muslim for a Muslim assailant. A kafir, even if he is your full brother, let's say, is not from your aqila, as he is not from the inheritors. So these are the 5 conditions for the aqila to pay the blood money. And also we have 5 scenarios where the aqila do not need to pay. And so number 1 is the amd, or the intentional killing, which we would call murder. Secondly, if the one who is killed is a servant, because like we said before, a servant's blood money is not really blood money, it is his value, so it becomes like destroying property. And thirdly, in a case of al-iqrar, this is when the killer confesses that he killed. Here the aqila do not need to pay. Now why would that be? There is no evidence for this, but there is a rationale, or a ta'lil. And what they say is that if he confesses, then his confession is on him. No one else should bear the burden of his own confession. Unlike if you have evidence that he killed, because an evidence can be imposed on another person, whether he likes it or not, because evidence is evidence. You cannot ignore it, and you can impose it on other people so that they have to abide by it. But as for a confession, this is not a type of evidence which you can impose on another person. A confession can only be imposed on the one who actually confessed. So in a case like this, only he has to pay the blood money, meaning the one who confessed. Fourthly, as-sulh. Now the way this works is that person A claims that person B killed his relative. Person B denies this allegation. But in order to avoid going to court, they agree to a settlement, an out-of-court settlement. This is as-sulh. The question is, do the aqila have to pay what they agreed? The answer is no, because this does not take the same ruling as a blood money. It is an out-of-court settlement. It's a financial matter between person A and B. The aqila do not need to get involved here. So actually the iqrar and the sulh are very similar in that the aqila do not need to get involved in either of these cases, al-iqrar and as-sulh. We also have authentically a statement of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, authentically in al-Bayhaqi, that he said that the aqila do not pay for the amd, intentional murder, nor for the abd, the servant, nor for the i'tiraf, which is the iqrar or confession, and nor for the sulh. So in these 4, the aqila do not get involved. Of course, this is not a hadith, it's a statement of Ibn Abbas, but then again, Ibn Abbas was from the eminent scholars of the Sahaba, whose opinions need to be taken seriously, unless they are in direct conflict with the Quran or authentic and clear-cut Sunnah, or in conflict with another scholar of the Sahaba. And fifthly, that the blood money to be given should be under a third. So if it is a third or more, then the aqila pay. If it is under a third, the aqila do not pay, rather the assailant pays. Now why do they say this? They rely on the statement of Umar radiallahu an, which Ibn Hazm reports in his book Al-Muhalla, in which he judged that the aqila only pay if the blood money reaches the al-ma'muma, which we said before is a third of the blood money. So they rely on that statement. They also rely on a rationale which says that anything below a third is small enough for the assailant to pay by himself, but a third is much. And as the Prophet said, "Ath-thuluthu kathir," a third is much. And this is the Hanbali madhab. Outside the madhab, you can argue against it. You can say that in the narration of the woman from Hudayl, when she was ordered that the blood money of the fetus is a good quality servant, then this is worth less than a third of the total blood money, meaning it's worth less than 33 1/3 camels. And yet the Prophet still demanded that the aqila should pay. And Allah Jalla wa Ala knows best. Let us end off with some review questions. Question number 1. We mentioned that there are 3 types of killing. Recall them and then explain what results from it, meaning what must the killer do, what is incumbent upon him. Question number 2. With regards to qisas or retaliation, give the 5 conditions of eligibility for a life qisas, and then give the 3 conditions of administration of the life for a life qisas. Question number 3. Give the 5 occasions where the aqila do not need to pay the blood money.